So I want you to imagine that this jar is your skull and this orange is your brain. And in the case of a concussion, that's what your brain looks like inside of your skull. Obviously your head, if you get hit pretty hard, is not gonna shake that much, but that's what it's gonna look like. If you got whiplash or you got hit in the head, your brain's gonna hit against the side of your skull like that, and that's gonna cause damage to your brain, obviously. So that's what I'm gonna talk about today is concussions. So Healthline states that nearly 3 million cases of concussions happen each year in the United States, making concussions an epidemic in the United States. So that's a lot of concussions each year, which a lot of those come from athletes who are in contact sports, so football players, soccer players, even in softball sometimes, even they have a helmet on, things happen. But also even in car crashes, when people get whiplash a lot, that also can cause a concussion. And so concussions can be very serious. There's kind of a big range of how serious a concussion can be on a person. But I think it's important that we know how concussions can affect us and the risk that we're taking when we put ourselves in those positions. So as athletes, when we put ourselves in positions to get concussions, or even if you know athletes that do that, or even when you grow up and you become parents, whether you let your children be involved in athletics, just knowing the risk that you take letting that happen. So I think concussions are very interesting, and I've always done a lot of research on them because I think it's crazy how important our brain is and how much damage is actually done to it that we don't even see. So I'm going to talk about how someone gets a concussion, the symptoms of a concussion, and then long-term effects of a concussion. So like I showed you with the jar, our brain sits inside of our skull in a fluid, so that's why there's water in there. So it's kind of just floating inside of our skull. So anytime you hit your head, your brain's gonna kind of slide over and hit the side of your skull, and that's what actually causes a concussion, is your brain hitting the side of your skull. So most often, like I said, happens in contact sports, but even in things like car crashes or fights, anytime you hit your head, there's a chance that you're gonna have a concussion. So if someone has a concussion, they will most likely experience, obviously, it'll probably hurt their head. They can have memory loss, confusion, drowsiness, dizziness, and then sometimes nauseousness as well. And then as they're recovering from their concussion, they will often be a little bit irritable. They can have sensitivity to light or noise and difficulty concentrating, and then sometimes headaches multiple days after the concussion. So those are some short-term effects, but there are also, with really bad concussions, long-term effects. Medical news today says that concussions do have long-term effects that can last up to decades after the concussion happened. So years after, people can show signs of Parkinson's disease and even Alzheimer's. That's many years after pretty traumatic concussions. There are a lot of different long-term effects, but I'm mostly going to talk about CTE just because that's kind of one that's newer and that is really pretty dramatic. But chronic traumatic encephalopathy is what CTE stands for. So this is a normal brain, and this would be a brain with CTE. So you're only going to see this after someone dies. Obviously, they're going to have to cut your brain. But you can see the spaces that it takes up out of your brain and like almost just deterioration of your brain. And so this could be like a 40-year-old man's brain with CTE, but that would also be what a 90-year-old man with Alzheimer's brain would look like. So that's how fast CTE kind of deteriorates a brain compared to other diseases like Alzheimer's. So some people almost call it early onset Alzheimer's, which some say isn't possible, but it kind of has the same effects on what your brain looks like. So one of the most recent stories of CTE was Aaron Hernandez. He was in prison for, I believe, killing his girlfriend, and he was on trial and ended up taking his own life in prison at the age of 27. And he was obviously an NFL player, so probably had a lot of concussions in his life. And because of the kind of just dramatic change he had in his life before this happened, they did do a cut of his brain after he died, and he was found to have CTE in his brain. So he showed signs of aggressiveness, irritability, just really kind of changed a lot in a really short period of time, which is kind of signs of CTE. So he did something even so dramatic as like killing his girlfriend and then ended up taking his own life. And it was almost kind of things that he couldn't control. And they believe that that kind of came from him having CTE. And then the first case to ever happen or find CTE in a brain was Mike Webster. And he died of a heart attack in 2002. But his story is that he played football for a very long time. He was a center. And so he had a lot of, he got hit quite a bit. But he was a very good man. People always talked about how good of a person he was, very nice, had a great family, had a great relationship. And then all of a sudden just kind of spending tons of money, throwing his family into debt, doing irrational things. He left his family. He was living out of his truck for a while, and he would actually tase himself to stay awake, because when he would fall asleep, he would have these terrible dreams and almost kind of like hallucinations. So they believe that like him tasing himself all the time led to his heart attack. So he died of a heart attack, but CTE inevitably caused his death. So he was the first one, and if you've seen the movie Concussion with Will Smith in it, they talk about his story. He was the first brain that CTE was ever found in a brain. So in conclusion, concussions can obviously be very serious, but they can also be, sometimes today they're seen quite often, but they're not something to take lightly. And so that's why I think it's so important, is that you just know the risk that you're taking when you put yourself, playing football and sports where you're going to get concussions, and knowing how susceptible you are to something like that. So that's what I have for you. I hope you learned a little bit about concussions.